All right, welcome, Kenny, to the Leaders Who Care series. It took me a while to get you here, but you're here and you're not allowed to leave.
That's
So
right.
welcome. Um, let's start off like the best way to start off is if you can share who you are, share a little bit about where you're from originally, where you are now. We'll get into the business stuff in a bit, but family or something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal it to the world, that's always a pretty cool thing too. If you got one of those, but welcome. Tell us.
Yeah. I always love that question. And it's always an interesting question when people are like, tell me about yourself. And like, and I for most of my life, I started with I call them the labels, like, I'm a dad, I'm an uncle, I'm a cousin. And then I realized over time I'm really a collection of my character, like my values. So now I introduce myself as like, I'm a person of faith, I have integrity, I'm disciplined. I have honor. I'm compassionate. Like the values that I live on is who I say I am because that's who I am in every situation. Even when I'm a dad or I'm a son or I'm a cousin or I'm an accountant, even in those situations, I'm still those things at the same time.
Where are you from originally?
Originally from Washington, D.C. So I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., live here in Connecticut now with my beautiful wife, Nikita, and our three kids, and came to Connecticut to go to college. So shout outs to Wesleyan University, go West. Got me up here to Connecticut and been here pretty much ever since.
Cool. How do and you still like winters, huh?
The climate had changed a bit.
It
When I
does, yeah.
first got here, and I did not know that DC really sat in the mid-Atlantic and it was pretty warm. I just thought that was like what climate was until I had my first semester in Connecticut and I called home and said, you know what? My coat was not a real coat. I need a real coat, like something with fur down and I never realized I didn't own a real coat my entire life until I came to Connecticut.
Yeah, that's where you find out for sure. And maybe what we would call in Montreal a toque, which was like a little hat on top when for the ears and the whole bit. I got you on that. Well, you talking about a little bit of kids and whatnot. What were you like as a kid or a teenager? Were you a reader? Were you the lemonade stand mini entrepreneur or a math like maybe a math numbers guy from where you at? Or what were you like? What did you do?
I always like to learn. I think I was so excited about school, and I think it's came from my great grandmother. My great grandmother grew up in the South at a time where she couldn't go to school like she wanted to, and she always told me those stories of how she really wanted to go but had to stop at like sixth grade. And so for me, I just really just leaned in heavy to school. So I was always in numbers and just always just loved to learn. So that was never something to me that was foreign or I just didn't have a love for. It was just always there.
Numbers. I remember because like you, I went into accounting, but I remember numbers. But we used numbers on a thing called Stratomatic Baseball. It was a board game that was called Stratomatic Baseball, and all the statistics were there and everything. And we had no computers back then, so we're doing all sorts of calculations and whatnot. Really made you think.
Yeah, I played. I used to love with in the neighborhood playing Monopoly. Nobody wanted to play after a while because I had figured this thing out.
What, you start doing it for money? Is that why they didn't want to play?
Just I just love to win. I just like to win. And it was a game where I felt you had influence. It wasn't all chance. Like, yeah, there was chance in there built in, but it was also that you had to have some strategy. So I love games that had both elements, some chance and strategy built in. So Monopoly was perfect for me.
Yeah, you probably bought Park Place every time, right?
I love the yellows and the purples and oranges. Those are deadly over time. I learned about property
That
and
could be
risk.
fun. That could be fun one time. We all get together and actually play Monopoly. That would be fun. Um,
That'd be
I,
awesome.
I would take that up. Let's look at your journey a little bit here. First, you got your bachelor's in economics, master's in accounting, you got your CPA. I can relate to that. You worked with somewhat of a focus on internal audit, analysis, financial reporting. All that time, what were you envisioning yourself as what was going to happen?
Yeah, and and I would say this entire time this was a journey. So I did not have a magic wand in the beginning saying this. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and now I'm doing it. So when I started out, like I mentioned, just education was important to me. So my lifelong dream was just to graduate from college. So I was the first in my family to graduate from college. So I just had that lifelong dream to graduate from college. Then I encountered a problem. I graduated. And so then it sounded like, yeah, you did it, but I learned the lesson of you set a goal, you need to set a new goal. And so from there, I just started saying, well, since I'm working in finance, I should get promoted. So I just kind of went along that process to learn as much as I could, understand as much as I could. So I went from public accounting, started there, then moved into public corporations. And then from there was in manufacturing. I became a controller eventually.
Mhm.
Eventually led a FP&A shop, became a startup CFO. So I did all of the traditional things in finance, but eventually my life changed when I started considering purpose. And I know that's the premise
Well,
of
and
this
we'll get to
podcast,
that. We'll get to it.
but that's where I made the change. So I won't go into that yet. I'll let you lead me there.
Well, that could be scary, as my friends say, but that's another story. But so you and I can relate too, having been my CPA and whatnot. There was less thought about purpose back then. We wanted to make a difference, like every generation was, but there was less thought about purpose. Was that the same for you? That it was just that the path was financial and going in like that, and then whatever happened happened.
Yeah, it was just a drive to get more skills so you would have a better resume. So that was my drive initially for the
Right?
CPA. And I really thank one of my mentors for that, which is Kenneth Pimpton. He just retired. Finally, he kept saying he was gonna go, but he was the head of internal audit for the NFL. And so he really imparted on me when we met each other. He actually met my wife Nikita first. They kind of just bumped into each other on the train, and he had just was staffing up the group for internal audit for the NFL. And she's like, my husband's an auditor. And he's like, oh my gosh, I wish I met you guys like, 2 weeks before. And we started talking. And he's like, you know what? Everybody on my staff has a CPA. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm going to finally do this. And he was the one that pushed me to go get the license. And that was transformative for me. And it wasn't necessary because now I can call myself a CPA. It was what I had to do to get it. It was the study, the dedication that I had to do to get the license was transformative for me in my life.
Yeah, it kind of set a foundation for me too. That's really what it did, a foundation where you can then go on to do a lot of different things, actually. And it's interesting. I can really appreciate the internal audit because, and we'll talk about it in a minute, it wasn't looked upon necessarily in the more positive way as some other positions, but the really good internal audit departments, I kind of stop people from beeping me here. And the good internal audit departments work more consulting firms within the company and everything. And I think the most viable to keep moving up in the company because you knew more about the whole company than if you were in just one position. But so we'll get into it. I want to move a little direction here on some of your background. You know, our firm, Fifth Element, we founded it on the premise that leaders in their organizations will always do better when they're doing good. So you were immersed in several cool general passion projects, if I may say it that way, and but police community relations, collaborative stand against racism, social media work, sports and entertainment, celebs you worked with, and more. How did you how did you aim for that, or how did that land for you based on your experience as we're talking about doing what I would call at that point the usual jobs that we went into? And you took courses in internal audit and risk management. It was like, the usual standard, traditional stuff, but then you went into general passion projects. How did that even happen?
Yeah, and you led me here to the purpose because that's where things changed. And
Mhm.
so just speaking of like what you were mentioning about internal audit, I mean, for me, that was such a training ground. I still use those skills today. So everything I say on this podcast, I might, we talk about some of the great things some projects I was able to work on. I built these foundational skills I learned back in accounting and finance. So with internal audit, one of the key things there, I got to see almost every aspect of the business. I mean, I got to see how HR worked, treasury worked, accounting worked, finance worked, down to how the trucker delivered something from the factory floor to the customer. I did a ride along to see how they did that. So I got to see from operations to finance, from sales, from order to cash, like the entire cycles of a business, how that works. And eventually seeing different businesses. I spent some time working at Pitney Bowes, and at that time they were acquiring a lot of different companies. And so, in those days, they were just the market leader with the postage machines. They were trying to figure out what else could they get into. And so we're buying a lot of different businesses. They would send, teams of us out there after they acquired a business and say, okay, help us, understand the operations and process of this new business we bought. So I would just go to a new company. It was like a digital scanning company, and it was scanning documents. And that was new at that time. It was like,
Right.
what was this online thing trying to scan legal documents for people so that lawyers would have access to this information. And so I'm there like, okay, learning their business model, trying to figure out where they can help them improve how they get their revenue, and just doing that. And, as a young person, just trying to learn those skill sets, but make really meaningful suggestions at the same time. And so that was one of the key things I learned from internal audit, is really how to understand a business structure quickly and then make meaningful suggestions, which I end up doing now when I'm with influencers and athletes and they're talking about what they want to do. I can quickly say, hey, I think should think about this from this angle, because that's what I was doing back in the day when I was internal audit.
Yeah, I love it because if you remember, internal audit used to mean finding stuff that was done wrong, and that's why people didn't like you because internal audit's coming in to our department. How did you share with us how you maneuvered looking at operational improvement, which was welcome for a company, to focus on sustainability via education, assessments, reporting, etc., to the point of now having an ESG roadmap and how that benefits the business from both an economic and social impact? Because you took it to a new level. There was internal audit got into being more like maybe we can consult better and get operational improvements. How do we take it into really being an impact, both economically and social, and then ESG to top it all off?
Yeah, and that is the journey for me. As I was mentioning, like I would say a hardcore numbers guy. I was closing the books. I was doing FP&A. I was a hardcore numbers person. And so when the questions started coming up in my mind about why are you doing what you're doing,
Right.
that's where I started to think about purpose. And so that led me on a journey to start asking questions, getting new mentors, starting to search a lot. Eventually, I got led to my big break, I would say, that kind of that transitioned me. I had both, starting to try to figure out, what else I could do. I got introduced to a guy named Stephen Beatty. So he's a songwriter. He had written songs for Bruno Mars. He won a Grammy with Madonna. And so he was looking to make music videos for kids with challenges. And so we just started talking, and I just started giving ideas and suggestions like, okay, you've been paying for this out of your pocket. These are these other models you could do. And so with that, ended up making a music video with DeMarcus Ware, who had won the Super Bowl with, I think played for the Cowboys most of his career, but I think he won a Super Bowl with the Broncos. His son had ADHD. So ended up, Stephen wrote a song called They Don't Know, which talks about ADHD. And so that was going great. We're selling along. We're about to shoot the video for the song. And Stephen calls me one of the greatest calls I got. I'm sitting in my office at work. So I'm still a leg. I'm an accountant here, an auditor. And so he calls me in my office and I'm on the phone with him. He says, guess what? I just got off the phone with Snoop Dogg. He says that he wants to join this project. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You got to kidding me. And you know, and a week later, we have like a song with Snoop Dogg on it. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm here as an accountant with unreleased Snoop track. What does this mean? And I had to start thinking, like, what does this mean? Like, why is this happening to me? And so from there, I just kept doing the search. And then I got introduced to helping athletes give back and brought Charlie Ward to speak at he played for the Knicks at the Boys and Girls Club here in Stanford. And I just started figuring out, hey, is this lane to do good with these influencers? You know, how can I continue to do that? So I marched off and started doing some consulting there. And then one day, the big change came. I went to a panel discussion and it was around sustainability. But I don't think I even knew the topic was sustainability. So I
Right.
was kind of there. And the woman leading the panel, her name was Annalise Paik. I talked to her afterwards. She was like, you're doing all this good work, but you have this corporate background. You should consider sustainability. And I said, what's that? And then she explained it to me. And so I went home, literally Googled it, got introduced to the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, so SASB, and I reached out to them and I ended up being in their second cohort to get their certification they were offering, which was the Financial Sustainability Certification. I studied for that, got that certification, and that was my first gateway. Well, now I understand the basic premise of sustainability, how it relates to business. And then I started just going out volunteering where I could. I ended up on the Electric Vehicle Club of Connecticut, working with them and they were supporting EV legislation here in Connecticut. And then from there, I ended up on the Connecticut Sustainability Business Council. And that led to my first job in sustainability at Frontier Communications. So that was my journey of really now putting both of them together. I would say I was doing, you know, corporate finance work. Then I started doing give back work and really, you know, helping not-for-profits, these influencers and athletes, and then bringing them both together, I would say, in the corporate space, which I enjoy because corporates have such reach. And that was the one thing I liked about influencers is because they have a lot of reach and platforms. But if we think about corporations, I mean, we all have something in our homes and something is probably just being at a minimum that is produced by a corporation. And you know, we're watching TV, their reach is just such has a grand scale. What if I can get them to think about purpose, their effect on the
Right.
community, environment, and those things and employees? And so that's where I love being in sustainability because it helps, I say, bring a conscience to corporations because corporations are a legal person, but I say a person without a soul. And so I think the sustainability brings that soul to a corporation.
No, I love that. There's actually a video done about 2 years ago called The Corporation. It's on YouTube, and it talks about the first corporation and what that was really supposed to be. It talks about it had to have it had to be some kind of public benefit. It couldn't make mergers and acquisitions without permission of the community, and the leaders of it were accountable. They weren't hidden by the corporation to not be accountable. They were accountable. We've evolved for the good and bad of that, if you will, of how corporations. One of the things I'm interested to know is, you know, you have to, there's a period there where you had to convince corporate leaders that this is good for business too. That in fact, your business can do way better when you are doing good too. And then there's the next step of we have to do an ESG report. Within Europe, it's almost mandated, and here it's growing, but it's another thing to do, a type of thing. How did you find that transition that corporate leaders would realize this is good for business?
Yeah, and I I really spent, I would say, the first 6 to 12 months just telling the story of why this was important because at Frontier Communications, this was their first ESG report they would issue. I mean, they first just thought leadership around sustainability. So I'm here talking with the senior leadership of the organization about sustainable principles, why it's important. So I would tell one, and then I had to tell the story again. And then they would all say, great, great, that's great. But then they would send me to their next level down, their functional leader, and I have to tell it again. And then we have that meeting. And then I would get all the way down to the analysts, and they're like, what is the sustainability thing? And I have to explain it a 15th time. So I became very good about talking about the story. And really, what helped me, and speaking of internal audit, when you're going to tell a leader they have to do something, you got to tell them why it's good for the business. Just saying because the corporate policy said so, nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear, why does this make my business better? And it could be, well, if you do this, you reduce the risk of loss. You have to come with some reason. Same
Right.
thing for sustainability. I had to then tell these leaders, if you follow these sustainable dimensions, you would have better talent retention. You would have a less of an impact on your environment, and you can reduce energy costs. So I had to really show them how, reduction in energy costs was a good thing, and you can save dollars with that over the long run. But really showing them how it affected the financial bottom line. Like, so really introducing, you do have an impact, and I was introducing impact to the organization. There's an impact bottom line, but also how this tied to their financial bottom line, because most of these leaders grew up under a regime of that it was just business of business is business. And so I had to really understand their lens and talk in a language that would be something that would be actionable and understandable and digestible for them.
Yeah, got it. And it's always interesting for me to see the thread. So you like numbers, playing Monopoly when you were a kid. Then you got the financial background. Then you moved on into operational. How do we get it better? And then into purpose, actually, as a business, it's good for business type of thing. So even though we never know exactly where it's going to lead, I always find it fascinating how previous experiences do allow you to get into different things. And that takes us now to where you are now, basically. And they say the Industrial Revolution was the fourth Industrial Revolution is about tech, which is AI and virtual reality and whatnot. But they're also saying that the fifth is about people, about humanity. You've taken your sustainability experience at Amex now, and you've joined Booking Holdings, which is really a amazing technology company when you get right down to it, that's doing things that people love, travel and buying and this and that and whatever. Tell us all about that opportunity, why you're excited about it, and how you're taking all these experiences and making Booking and their affiliates, their companies, better.
Yeah, and that's been my story, my journey, and being able to go from Frontier to American Express, one of the largest brands in the world, right? And so recognized everywhere, such a revered brand. And I was super excited for that opportunity because they understood sustainability. I didn't have to explain to them, why sustainability was important. They were one of the leaders in the field. And so I think it was just really like thinking about how can we do deeper programs that affect people, because our cards are with people. And so how do we think about some of the programming to do that? So some of the main pillars there were financial confidence. That's what I was mostly interfaced with, which was how do we get our consumers, build their credit scores up so that they can be a card holders, because we know that financial health is important for everyone. And so just having these different programs, like we had one program where you could download these tips. It was like an app, and you could play a game and you could win some bonus bucks in there to buy different things, but it was teaching you financial literacy, and just supporting organizations from our foundation that help with teaching underrepresented groups about financial literacy. So it was just so many great things that the organization were willing to do in the community and with the employees there. And so I just, just as you mentioned, made the leap over to Booking Holdings, which is one of the largest travel providers in the world. And what they look to do is just make travel easier for everyone because they believe, and the company believes, that if people meet each other, it breaks down walls. And
Mhm.
so I'm just like, I can't make this stuff up. Like this is the life I get to live, to work for organizations that are, dedicating themselves to do good while doing business at the same time. So I think to be in a tech space to do that is so exciting for me. And I've kind of now come back home. I was in a sustainability function at American Express. Now I'm in finance here. And I'm the first hire in finance with a sustainability background. I'm leading the sustainability reporting. And so now, how will we tell our sustainability story with some financial rigor around it? Because most of the reporting before was voluntary. So companies were choosing to do it. Now Europe has leaped forward with
Right.
regulation around CSRD. One of the acronyms is out there that's now mandating that companies report how are they doing their sustainability missions. Tell us about your strategies. Tell us about your imprint. Tell us about your emissions impact. And so now there's mandated rigor around that reporting, which I think will really even change. I think some companies that were on the fence before saying it was a nice to have, that day is now gone. Is now the community, the world, the users of financial statements have realized that this information about your impact is really important, and it shows us what type of leader you are. Can you manage all of these dimensions, not just profit, but your employees, but your impact on the community and environment? Can you manage those? How is your management of all those dimensions, because they do affect the company? So it is a very exciting time for me. I'm really on the forefront of this because it's not as many finance people in sustainability. So they're finally now here, and so excited to be in this space.
Well, you're going to be on the Hall of Fame of finance sustainability guys that really started. But you're so right. Do you remember way back when people would and companies would say, "Well, we're a green company," well, whatever that means, and it was the PR guy that was the head of green. And now it's evolved to the point where it's always these type of things are always good for the companies and the leaders that really mean it because it shows they're the ones doing it, whereas the ones that aren't doing it are also seen as the ones not doing it. And candidates, talent, absolutely go to companies where they can both make money and have purpose at the same time. Consumers are looking more, right, about who is doing it that way. So it is good for business to be that. And I think it's exciting, especially with a company like Booking, where it is about meeting people. And I love that slogan, if you will, because we need to meet people more often and listen to each other and whatnot. So, in LA, we say you got to leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. We may have to do a sequel on this, but I have one more question on this part. um, 2020, the pandemic year, one of my clients told me in 2021, he said that was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought it was like crazy statement, but I get it. Sometimes you feel like it was yesterday, sometimes years. With all that said, and we're already at the end of 2024, which is amazing in itself. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for as well?
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, 2020 was like a pivotal year for me, actually. That was really when I leaned in more on faith. I wanted to start talking about financial literacy, and I just got the message, hey, you should read the Bible. And so that's when I started leaning in and trying to extract these financial principles, but doing that kind of changed who I was and what I was striving for. So even though the pandemic, we had a lot of, it was a terrible time with disease. We had the George Floyd and a lot of other things that weren't so good. For me, it was ended up being like a moment to sit back and like question and really lean into purpose. So I'm so grateful for that. And now I'm sitting here in 2024. I feel like I'm focused and I know exactly what I want to do. I've committed to say, I'm going to work only on things that are going to promote good values. So I've decided that my hands are going to do that every day in my work, whether I'm doing finance or if I'm helping an influencer. Like, so they both are the same. It just might wear a different jacket that day, but underlying is that I've committed to doing value-based work. And so for me, I'm just so excited every day of like, what do I get to work on? Like, what's next here? I'm finishing up my book here on faith, finance, and purpose. And that is just trying to explain this journey that I've been on, but to teach people, how their finances link to their purpose. So I'm just excited every day, like of what's next and how can I help and how can I serve. And that's what I'm always looking to do. Anyone I meet, I'm trying to lift them up and make them better.
No, that's great. Well, I'm grateful that you are a leader who cares and a good friend, and I'm hopeful for actually for the same reason that you are a leader who cares and you're putting it out there and you're capitalizing on the opportunity and making other people better. So thanks for being on Leaders Who Care series with us.
I was happy to be here. Thanks, Mark, for asking me to join. And if you have a part 2 or 3, you can sign me up.
Count on it. Thanks.